A cultura é um dos mais preciosos instrumentos de democracia. É um canal de expressão plural que permite a convivência de diferentes vozes, histórias e visões de mundo. E por isso a cultura, tal qual a democracia, deve ser defendida e fortalecida. Essa é a função da Lei Rouanet, a principal política pública de incentivo à cultura brasileira. Com ela, perseguimos a missão de assegurar o acesso democrático à produção e à difusão cultural. Ao longo de mais de 3 décadas, a Rouanet permitiu que inúmeras iniciativas culturais, antes inviáveis, ganhassem o mundo. Revelou histórias, preservou tradições e transformou vidas. Lei Rouanet, há 33 anos tornando a cultura brasileira mais plural, acessível e democrática.
Casal de dançarinos se olham sorridentes. Uma banda orquestrada para de tocar. Logos: Lei Rouanet, Ministério da Cultura, Governo Federal, Brasil, União e Reconstrução.
Onde tem cultura, a Vale está. No poder criativo que nasce dos palcos, orquestras, das artes, das ruas e dos museus. Na valorização das diversas identidades brasileiras e na preservação de memórias. É valorizando a cultura que crescemos e evoluímos juntos. Instituto Cultural Vale.
Ministério da Cultura e a Associação Casa Azul apresentam 23ª FLIP, Festa Literária Internacional de Paraty. A FLIP conta com o benefício da Lei Federal de Incentivo à Cultura, Lei Rouanet, PRONAC 235060, e possui acessibilidade para pessoas com deficiências física, visual e auditiva. Tem patrocínio Jequitibá do Nubank. Patrocínio Figueira da Vale. Patrocínio Guapuruvu do Itaú e da Motiva, por meio do seu instituto. Patrocínio Cedro do Sesc, da MAC Móveis e de O Globo. Patrocínio Araribá, da Globo Livros. Apoio institucional da Prefeitura de Paraty, Governo do Estado do Rio de Janeiro, IFAM, Instituto do Patrimônio Histórico e Artístico Nacional e Museu do Território. É uma criação e realização Associação Casa Azul e Ministério da Cultura, Governo Federal, Brasil, União e Reconstrução. FLIP, o encontro da literatura com a cidade.
respeito, principalmente. Você não vai chegar no rio com sede e vai chegar correndo e vai querer beber uma água. Primeiro você vai chegar e você vai parar, né?
Para nós, na sabedoria do Guarani, se eu tô indo de respeitar o mar ou cachoeira, eu possa me sentir mal depois ou chegar a me afogar ou acontecer acidente ali comigo. Por exemplo, quando eu vou na cachoeira, eu não vou mergulhar rápido, eu vou ficar sentado em cima da pedra, conversa um pouco comigo ali, depois mergulho.
Então tem que já tinha porando, está de acordo, porando, né? Conversar ali com o rio para não se descer correndo, escorregar e cair. Né? Porque o espírito são vivos. Você tem que ter uma concentração para você descer ou atravessar, né? Para ser bem recebido pela natureza. Né?
Que tá no seu corpo aquele ruim, tira tudo, né? Cachoeira leva tudo embora. Você fica levinho, levinho de novo.
Some observations. I forgot to say this yesterday. Not only the main program for all of you here in the main auditorium, we have people hearing us outside in the square. We know, so good morning for all of those who are at the square, sitting in the square. And if you're not in Paraty, you can also watch all these roundtables on Felipe's YouTube channel, as well as Arte One channel, a dear partner for Flip for many years. And all the program will be made available. You can watch them all again and be moved again. Everything will be made available, as I said, on our YouTube channel. Yesterday we had a beautiful day with very impactful tables. So now we're going to do a deep dive in our author, Leminski. I was gifted a beautiful gift by Luana Schneider, and I'm not sure if she's here, but I know she's in Paraty. She is the granddaughter of Regina and Boris Schneiderman. Boris Schneiderman is one of those who came to Brazil to hide. And there are some personalities that are essential for the Brazilian culture. He came to Brazil and leave a beautiful legacy, like Boris Schneider, Paulo Luna, who were Jewish people trying to flee a war, and they left in Brazil an amazing legacy. So Boris and Regina were friends with Leminski. They met through Russian poetry, concrete poetry, and Leminski, along with Alice, became friends with Boris. And Luana Schneider showed me a letter written by Alice Ruiz, addressed to Boris and Regina Schneider. It's a very moving, beautiful letter, where she says that Estrela Leminski was born 13 days ago. And she says, so the news is that Estrela was born, but in the next paragraph she says that they are very moved by the birth of their daughter Estrela. And in the next paragraph she starts talking about theory, poetry theory. And she says this beautiful sentence, Alice addressing it to Boris and Regina: poetry is politics as much as any poet. Poetry should be purposeful. It has to be each person's truth. What I love about this excerpt, not only a woman that had recently given birth and talking about poetry, and this is just who Alice is. It is true that this is poetry. And then after yesterday, we were able to prepare a flip that will skip between politics, poetry, and this whole personification of Leminski, but with well-rooted feet. As Italo Calvini, that Tarso referred to yesterday, it's so important for us to consider literature. I guess this will include all the different types of literature, all the styles. And this is how we move forward. You know, we will win while we are distracted. Distraídos venceremos. Now, I'm just babbling here because we have to wait for all our authors to arrive. And I love the name. It is called See Back, Vidiverso. And we have a very concrete, we thought about having a festival just with poetry in São Paulo. And this was a long time ago. And while we were thinking about this, Luna, our mediator, and then thought about this. But now I invited him to mediate. I stole the name of his festival, but now at least I invited him back to be the mediator. Thank you very much. Hello. Good morning, everyone. Let me invite the stars of the day. Please, Alice Ruiz, Claudia Roquette-Pinto, and Marília Garcia, please. Thank you. You're the third one, yes. Now these are big names. We have a couple of books for you to read. Claudia, these are your books. Alice, these are your books. And your Marília's. I have these books for you to read here. I would like to make a brief presentation. First, I would like to thank, of course, Ana Cecilio for inviting me to mediate Vidiverso CBAC. So we're going to think about these three poets from different generations with very diverse poetry. Alice in sort of a marginal outskirts type of poetry, always, you know, in between styles, and Claudia with a more meditative type of poetry, Marília with a narrative and almost a short story. So these are very important voices in Brazilian poetry. Yesterday we had lunch together to try to meet and talk and maybe, you know, talk about, this is something Flip always does. They give us food, which is good. And so we arrived earlier, Marília and Claudia, and we were, you know, having a look at the books, the poems, trying to understand where we were going to go with this program. And then Alicia arrived 10 minutes later when Alicia saw us with all those books spread out on the table talking about poetry, and she said, no, you can't organize because you can't control women. That's what she said. And you can't control women poets. And I said, Alicia, I had no intention of controlling women poets. So we will do the best we can here. Alice Ruiz was born at home, natural birth. And she has her moon in Aquarius, and she was born in 1946. Her father came from Germany, his mother from Spain, and she has a bit of gypsy blood. And this is how Alicia presented herself in Pelos Pelos, 41 years ago, a book she published. And she has already been awarded twice, the Jabuti, and she's definitely a big name in Brazilian poetry. Claudia Roquette-Pinto, she is celebrating her birthday today. I told you not to do that. Claudia Roquette-Pinto, the birthday girl, has a heart that has a bit of Clarice, and she will continue in her life, and she is always looking inwardly, and she saw the light of Ipanema and the Serra da Bocaina. She hides in the Bocaina region in finding herself in the state of poetry. She published, among other things, Corolla, which was awarded the Jabuti Award in 2022, and also Extrações do Dia, Extractions of a Day, bringing together most of her books and some of her younger, so to speak, poems. Marília Garcia looks like her father, has her mother's gestures, but her hair, her stature, and calligraphy from all her aunts. This is her. This is how she described herself in her poem. So it's a natural history of herself. She won the Oceanos award in 2018, and she just launched her first children's book, Escolha uma Palavra, choose a word, and the essays collection, Pensar com as Mãos. Before starting, I would like Alicia to tell us how are you living these days? We know that Flip is very emotional and moving and intense, and I believe that for you, you are, most of your work, I guess you are behind having Leminski being the author that is being honored here today. So I'm sure you're behind this. But you personally, with your family, with your daughters, the daughters of Leminski, and a grandchild also, and you're so. Give us an idea of what it's like for you to be here in Flip. I was looking for the microphone. I wasn't sure if you were like looking for some water. No, I was just looking for the microphone. I'm not used to live this, the Madonna type of. Well, she would sing like a virgin if you ask her. But, well, first of all, good morning. It's magical, isn't it? To have a space such as this filled with people who are interested in poetry written by women. At 10 on a Friday, and a Friday at Flip, it's almost a Tuesday. It's almost carnival. People were like partying hard yesterday. But about this emotion of being here, it is the first time, Luna, that I will answer a question about emotions without being grumpy. Well, this moment, of course, is very special to me. One thing I saw, and I want to ask Marília and Claudia also, is that normally for women, we are always asked about our emotion, even when it's work-related. When we prepared, my daughters and I prepared the Multiplo Leminski exhibit, they asked me, how were you feeling? And I would say, come on, if I hadn't put my emotion to the side, or I wouldn't be able to work, because this is what it is. But at Flip, of course, this is very moving to me. You can put on your CV, it was the only time that I wasn't grumpy, because it's, oh my God, it's hitting hard. Yesterday I had this moment of, I felt depleted of my energy because I started to feel even ill, physically ill. Paulo, to this recognition, this acknowledgement, a growing acknowledgement, and you're right, my daughter and I, yes, you are right. We are, of course, he's a very talented person, but we were those responsible for remembering him and working and allowing him to be acknowledged. So it's his work and our work that really bears fruit. This is something that is such a pleasure, it's such a joy. I guess the whole idea of being alive can be justified for these moments. My work worked, and his work worked, bared fruit, even though he was unable to witness this whole life, this recognition. But he was in a hurry to die. So we are here to talk about him, but talk about your work. Yeah, I know. But I can't resist, I can't resist the temptation. And everything is sort of mixed together, right? Yeah, no, I think so too. We were already a good mix-up with our daughters. Alice, so you came in, then Claudia, and then Marília. You have maybe 15 years apart between each one of you. It might seem very little, but it is a lot in terms of poetry and cultural transformation. One could be the other's mother, and I thought this was beautiful. I said, well, biologically speaking, you're right. If you had a child when you were 15, Marília could be my granddaughter. She could, yes, we are very precocious. So, how did you get to know each other's work? I'm going to start asking Marília. How did you get to know Claudia's work? Marília, you wrote the excerpt, the introduction to her book, and the Extração dos Dias, and you do present her, you say it's a beautiful solar, full of open spaces, but also it includes a little bit of darkness, ellipses, and violence. So how did you get to know Claudia's poetry, and what did you feel of that? First, I would like to thank for the invitation, for being here. It is such a privilege to be here, and with Fernando and Claudia and Alice. And it's so good to be here celebrating Claudia's life, and the fact that we are here today alive with everything that is happening around the world. And well, the first time I read Claudia was in a moment I started working in a publishing house in Rio dedicated to poetry, which is Sete Letras. I was maybe around 20, and when I got there, maybe the first weeks, Jorge Viveiro de Castros, the publisher, gave me some of the books in his catalog, and this book has just been printed. It was the second edition. It was not going to be published that year. It was A Zona de Sombra, and he said, take this book, you have to read it, you're going to love it. And this is how it happened. So it was one of the first contemporary poets, someone who was writing at that time, during that moment. And that then I started reading other poems by her. So as a publisher of poetry, is this something that made you write poetry? Yes. I didn't write before. I studied literature, and I didn't write at that time. So exactly that was the moment I started reading and working with publishing. It is a bit of a work as a reader. It's the other side of the coin, so to speak. So this is something very close to the text, and being able to read these contemporary poets that were writing at the exact moment was amazing. You know, to join, sort of to be part of that conversation, to understand, to think about different tools, and to think about the poem, thinking about the moment that a person was living when they wrote the poetry. So, Claudia, how did you discover Alice? Well, this is something well, first I have to thank people. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here in this early hours. We are very privileged and joyful. I'm a Buddhist, so everything I'm engaged in, I always think it is good for all the beings. So I'd like to thank you all, and I hope that all of you will find what you're looking for, and that you can take something positive in your life. That's the first thing. Thank you, Flip. Thank you for the invitation, and it's such an honor to be here. How did I find out Alice? Well, she found me. That's the other way around. As we say in Dharma, it's like a flow of voices, a chain of visions and different constructions and different ways of talking that will be transmitted from the mouth to the paper and conveys a certain value. So all the pioneer women from my generation, those who came before me, opening the path for all of us so that we can be here today where we are, and the generations after my generation are, that are, blossoming. I've never seen a flip, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've never seen a flip with so many poets, women poets. And this is something we owe to these pioneers who opened the doors for all of us with all their courage, with their grit, with this excellence. So it is such an honor to be here with my master and the sequence of that mastery. Did I answer your question? Okay, thank you. Alice, how did you discover their poetry? And maybe if you could talk maybe about who was your pioneer, who were the poets that you read, and how did you find out Claudia and Marília? Well, I'm not sure if I can remember how I discovered their poetry. Maybe this came maybe brought in by a feeling of hope. Because if we start to think about things, there's more than a century that all women have access to becoming literate, to education. So if you think about our history, this is an amazing phenomenon, the amazing number of women who write today. The boys, I'm sorry and apologize, because they, in terms of quality, we are the winning game here. You're right, you're right. Marília's generation is a generation that has, the best voices, or the louder voices are Marília, Angélica Freitas, Marília, Bruna Berber. So many poems that have very strong voices, and it's different from your generation. And I have this pleasure of having, when I met them, I met all the other amazing women. And this is why I can't say, well, Marília was this or that for me. It's impossible, because it was a big movement. All of a sudden, so many women, one name after the other, and I started reading them and buying the books and Googling their names with the internet. Of course, that helps a lot. It helps the lazy ones to find out, and that also spreads fake news, but not in this case. Only spreading good news in this specific case. And who did you read? Who did you read? Who were the women you read at that time?
Puxa vida.
There were few, yes. Few. One of the great influences, I would say, as a reverse influence, was Clarice Lispector, because even though she did not write poetry, her prose was very poetic. And it is more or less because of her that I did not write prose. Was it too high? Yes, exactly, because the times I tried writing, I would look at it and, oh my God, it wouldn't even come close to what Clarice does. So that's why I say it is a reverse influence, but there is a lot of poetry in her texts. And there is another poet named Gilca Machado. Gilca Machado was a very educated woman, very much like Clarice. She won an award before 20 years old, and it was a book with some kind of erotic take. And one of those literary men at the time, was complaining that it could only be an immoral woman, a matron, that wrote the texts. And I talked to Jilka. She was already ill in the end of her life, but I had this joy of talking to her, and she was already political because her poetry, you know that women writing about eroticism is something political. So besides this political, she had some explicit political attitudes at the time. And so you not only wrote also some erotic texts, but you published a magazine named Rose. Oh, you really did your homework. Yes, I loved finding out the slogan of the Rose magazine, and you're going to understand immediately what kind of magazine it was. Rose magazine, the magazine that undress men and informs women. Yeah. So let me remind you that we were in the midst of a military dictatorship, so it was even more daring to do so. How did you do it? Well, my initial motivation wasn't a noble one because there was no publishing house for magazines, and then there was one pioneer publishing house that launched a magazine. I can't recall the name, but very much like Veja magazine and Isto of a news magazine, Atenção. But to keep Atenção, the magazine, because in the very beginning there were not enough buyers and readers of the magazine because it was a novelty in town. And so they developed many small erotic um, comic magazines, and then it worked, and they decided to invite Ligia Mendonça and myself to write a magazine for women, but it needed to contain sex. We could say whatever we wanted, but it needed some sex material because that's what would ensure the selling of the magazine. So the logic was this one. It didn't change a bit. No, it didn't. But Lydia and myself, well, they knew who they were inviting to do so. So we organized meetings to decide about the content of the magazine. So every month it was a monthly magazine. We had to select men in foreign magazines. You mean the photos? Yes, the nudes. Very much like Playboy magazines. It was a Playgirl magazine. Yes, naked. Yes, naked, but everything showing. No, you couldn't. You cannot expose totally a man, only women. And so those in those European magazines, the men were totally naked. So we would always include some uh, black tags like this helps a very big covering parts of the photos. Yes, they were very successful, those erotic comics, and they were republished by Veneta Publishing House. And you were working also with Sugimoto and others. And I would like you to mention the first one you wrote, named Papel Principal, main role, which was something related to Dalton Trevisan. And it was a response to what Dalton Trevisan said, but you were his friend, so why did you decide to respond? Well, some people say that he's sexist in his writing, but that's not the case. Very much like Nelson Rodrigues, he was a kind of reporter or witness of what was going on at the time. So Dalton's stories at the time, and I say stories because he became more and more specialized in the minimum, very much like you with your haikais. Yes, but I was already born with that. As Paulo Leminski would say, it was a manufacturing um, fault. But Dalton made an effort to become like it. Yes, he's a man. He needed to make an effort. Well, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. But in moving towards the minimum, maybe. Where were we? Okay. So why did you decide to respond to Dalton in this first story? Well, that's because I was, I was telling a story and then there is Dalton's. We have two, so let me finish both of them. So Dalton, I don't know why I did it, because the main papel principal, the main role, he was he used to kill his main characters very often. So then I created a character that created female characters and killed them. And then I created one uh, uh, that was capable of reversing it and killing the author. It was a horror story, sex and horror. Do you want to go back to the other story? Well, the other one is only about Rose's uh, trajectory because it was very much a snapshot of the times we were talking about labor laws and women and education. We published about very serious topics, so always without some dose of humor and. And of course, the scripts included sex, and this article was Rose out of bed, but there were other Rose articles that were, well, in bed, yes, in bed. But we were able to convey our message, and we were very happy, and the magazine was selling very much all over Brazil. And then the owner of the publishing house decided to make a survey. I didn't want to turn my back to you, Claudia. Oh, don't worry, I can see you on the screen. And then he did a survey to identify the profile of our readers, and the result of this survey is that we were both dismissed because our readers were gay. They were gay men. Women were not buying our magazines. That's why I'm against surveys in media. We lost our job. Yes, but we won a poet. Yeah, I never stopped doing poet. Well, Marília, I would like to ask you to talk about the female presence in poetry because we've seen that Alice and Claudia were exceptions. There were few women poets in these at those times, and visual poetry was very much a male production, and Claudia also was working amidst many male poets. But you were born at different times and in a different place. So how do you feel like having started your career being surrounded by other women, poet women? Well, I think it makes a difference because when comparing to the moment Alice and Claudia started to write, and thinking of what Claudia was saying, that in the 19th century and only in the 20th century, there was more literacy or education available to women. Up until the 19th century, only part of women were educated, but only so that they were able to read books on marriage and recipes and etc. So cookbooks, and they needed to know how to read, but they did not learn how to write. Only in the 20th century, women start writing. Of course, barring those that were able to overcome those obstacles. So it is, in a way, very recent, this uh, presence, a female presence in writing. And I remember when I started to write, there was not so much room available. Claudia was one of the few women poet, writers, also Joselie Viana. There were some names, but not like today. Not like today. I remember that it required a great effort to find your space. There was a quota at magazines, and they started to try changing this scenario. And I am speaking of a very recent events. I started writing 25 years ago, and it was not like today. So we can say that in the last 2 decades there was a change, a significant change, because of many reasons. One of them is that there are many women who are publishers today, and also the identitarian movements, and it's a big difference. There are many poets, women poets, who are dealing with very different writing styles and contents, and this also offers the possibility of developing new works and experimenting. And Fabrizio was mentioned the contemporary writers yesterday, and of course we can create together. It's very much like a collective creation, and with this a greater number of women writing, things are very different. And can you already see something in common, a common trait in your generation, or are you too close to see something? Well, I think I'm too close still, but there is a lot of diversity. There are many aspects. I think that we can say that there is a very wide universe of poet women. What about you, Claudia? How was it to be an exception in the 90s? It's a little bit surprising because it looks very recent. Well, it was weird, very weird, and there are thousands of stories I could mention. In the past, I would repress them, but from poet, men, and journalists, I heard horrible things like if I showed a poem of mine to a friend of mine, a man, he would say, "You write like a man." Well, that's something I need to share, and our revenge is love, you know. There was also an older man poet, and I was talking to him on the phone, and he was asking me, "Well, but what do you want with this idea of writing poetry? Did you realize how many women write poetry today? Do you think you're going to get somewhere by writing poetry?" So, can you imagine? And statistically, 99% of men were men, and 9% of critics and publishers, and so men. At at my time, there was something named female poetry table or female literature poetry. So now we hear three women, but it's totally different. Yes, it is only a round table with the most important female poets in Brazil. Did I answer your question? Yes, you did. I would like to go into this generation shock, I would say, because in Marília, in her book, she wrote a book of essays, and she has a kind of poetry which is very much akin to essay, and it looked very natural for her to go into essay writing. And there is a specific one in which you signed Belgian poet Michaud, and he says that true poetry is done against poetry in the sense that you need to find new ways of saying something. So how can you say that your poetry was in opposition to what came before you? I don't really know if Henri Michaud was right. No, if I see myself as going against the previous generation, but I think that to be able to write, I look for this this opposition. I think that this opposition is an initial motivation for me to go against the the ordinary place of writing of words, because in the end of the day we end up writing with the words that we use every day, so the words that we use to communicate. So how can I write a poem capable of telling me something or taking me somewhere which is not an automatic place? So I think that I always need to pause and oppose it somehow. And I think also that there is a common place in poetry which is identified with emotion. We were talking about emotion, and it could be identified with a female writing, but I would say that overall Poetry is very much identified with emotion. I was reading an essay by Maria Negroni, who was here, and she says, who said that poetry is the expression of emotion and prose identifies with a narrative and essay is more of a reflective thing? And there are those categories, but in the end, we are dealing with an adventure of language, with writing, more than anything else. Yes, especially, and of course, a poem carries emotion, but it also carries a reflection, a theoretical content in a way that is unique, with the blank spaces, the non-said, some breakings, and elements that are very much akin to poetry, whereas poetry is going to go into a narrative approach. And then, of course, an essay can bring some emotion, but it's not coming from a common place. Yes, it's very curious that both of you try to bring emotion as something that should be present in female poetry. You use in a poem named Paisagem com futuro dentro. It's a landscape with a future inside in a free translation. And a verse is exactly goes like that. Why don't you write with emotion? And you made it very clear. Maybe the emotion as you describe it, you've described the emotion of a verse by Drummond. There is a very well-known poem by Drummond. On the left side, I carry my dad's, and that's why I walk sideways. And Marília was very much precising that at the same time he's able to contain and precise emotion. And I think that there is this emotion which is contained but also overflowing. And I'm going to ask you to read this poem on page 109, and then you are going to read also page 55.
So it was a nebulous expedition. I was finishing this book when my mother left me. What is the pace of the end, the rhythm? This is what I wanted to ask her now. But I can only listen. End. 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 I bring your name within mine. You leave, I stay. Leah fits in Marília. Your gestures never end. They are a rhythmed memory. Memory will go through your eyes and it will blink to you. This book is an elegy that will drown along with you. You may go. The end here is a yes.
Eu acho que se não
So, never people who never again people who ask why you don't write with emotions. From the same book, it's in page 55. Dialogue. It is a dialogue with a friend who has left us. I said, "Hello, where are you?" And he said, "How are things? How's the weather?" And he said, and then I said, "I continue to see the maps overlapped. And how about you?" And he said, and then I asked, "Can you hear me?" And he, and then I said, he left holes in the maps that I can't see the lines with precision. And I said, "Do you know what we can do to deepen the lines of a poem?" And he said, the lines. And I said, what? And he said, well, and I said, what? And he said, the lines of the mountains of the river. And I said, what about them? And he said, these are the lines of electrocardiogram. And I said, you wrote that in a poem. And he never again answered.
A gente falou de emoção, a gente falou de desejo também, e que sempre foi assunto tabu.
We talked about emotions and desire, and it was always a taboo for women poets. In your poetry, you started talking about desire in a very clear manner. In the first books, it was something that was a bit almost ciphered, and then it becomes more and more open, of course, without ever losing the form. Well, does it make sense? Yes, it makes sense. Because there's a biographical note to that. I was married for 20 years with the father of my 3 kids. And I started writing very early, even though I didn't start publishing very early. I published my first one when I was 28. And certainly in a traditional marriage, every fantasy, even the expression of the own desire that is already part of a taboo for many years, it will become a bit overlapped and hidden and hidden. And this was something that had to do with my poetry, because I graduated in literature and I had this angst of being influenced. You have to be very humble when you consider yourself a poet, because whatever comes afterwards will come after all the geniuses of all the different nationalities and languages. So we have to be very humble. So I was a bit afraid of this shyness, this courage, this will I had of expressing myself and elaborating my own language. But at the same time, I needed to feel contained, because there was something cool about the poetry in my generation, something. Even Carlito and I were seen as poets, Carlito Azevedo, and we came from the academia. They were considered intellectuals. We had studied. We made many references. So my poetry was considered more intellectual. It was more structured and cold in a certain sense, maybe a more elliptical type of poetry. But with time, or in time, I started ready to let it go, letting my hair down. And I became a bit more intimate with my own language, with my existential liberty and freedom. And then I started to write the way I write now, unafraid. So if you could read too from your first book, from the poem Genesis 31 of Dias Gagos. And then I will ask you to read the Resumo da Ópera at the end of Alma Corsária, your most recent book, to see what changed, how you changed the way you write in these last 40 years. I wanted to say something. People say that my poetry is erotic, but what is highly erotic is my relationship with languages. What's the page? It's page 31 in the beginning. The other one is Alma Corsária. It's on the other side, Resumo da Ópera. So start maybe for the first one, and then we take it from there. So it's page 31 of Dias Gagos. It's Genesis. No one says it's the color of the heat, your hair. In a hotel hall, we can see arsenic, someone taking arsenic. I can see bananas that are burning and alcohol that would rhyme with poison. The days and the months in my face like wind. sometimes there were lapses within a semester, and the pulverized blue would burn in my arteries. I, 17 and a half, etc. Any word that would be worthwhile. The fire in the middle of the square, this poem. This was just a free translation of a poem. Now, the one that was written almost 35 years later from Alma Corsário. It's called Resumo da Ópera, page 139. Resumo da Ópera. I am just a ceiling filled with dirt and infiltration, like an old ceiling. I'm just ex-belle of the ball. I have problems on my joints, on my head, and I feel some metal pins to hold things together, my teeth together. I'm a decadent piece of irony. I am just a flaccid mass that every day will melt and will melt all the way down, but I never slow down, and I look at the world with beautiful cells and soft meat being renewed, like renewing itself, and I invent a number of stories wherever I go. And then, in order to unravel, I take on my life. I'm just a voyeuse, very shy. Will you ever get me? The one who's always doing things so melancholic as Chet, because everything happens to me. But I have a joy that is almost a samba do avião. I am just absurd, and I will slip and slide every time, and then I will be seen through the eyes of a Moreno. Sex here, maybe with the lion from Metro. I am just statistics. I am just an insect, and I will be flying over the dirt. I'm nothing but a silly person, a plague. I am just disintegrating. Again, this is a very free translation of a poem. Was there an emancipation process, you believe? Yes, certainly, biographically speaking and literary speaking. And then I just hitchhiked on this whole idea of this poems. For 17 years, I didn't publish, and this also is part of a relevant part of my biography. No, I've always writing, but without publishing. So sometimes you forget things, or you are forgotten. So I'm like Lazarus, reborn. I'm Lazarus. So why did you why you did this for 17 years? What can I say is that there was a family issue. I lost my mother and my father in a very short period of time, and I had to become the support of all my family. And of course, and then there was a pandemic also. We can't even think about life. It's before and after the pandemic. So I had no energy to publish, to champion my own poetry, because we have to do everything. We have to write, we have to champion the poetry, we have to find a publishing house, we have to present ourselves, we have to do readings. So I was depleted, so I just needed to stop. In Alma Corsária, your more recent book, there's a poem called Zero de Estilo. It's a poem that has this idea of you have sort of an imposter syndrome. Maybe that has to do with the fact that your women in your generation feel a bit like imposters. You would feel rejected by the rest of the poetry scene. Do you agree? You talked about this need of being humble, of trying to present yourself as a poet, and if you don't need to have a certain special determination. There's a book I wrote in college. It's Susan Gubar. It's The Mad Woman in the Attic. Well, that's exactly it. It's the 19th century writers. Many of them would go mad because it's not just a matter of being illiterate, of being educated for women when this started happening, but those who wrote, because in Europe it started a bit earlier. There was no outflow, the Bronte sisters. You see all the stories of these women There was always a mad woman, you know, the mad woman in that house, the crazy one. They were rejected. So madness is very close in my experience, and I guess for many women too, of writing itself. No matter how much we are in 2025, it doesn't matter. But throughout my life, I saw that it was something exceptional to have a woman writing, but because of the system, not because of the talent or the women. And a very brief story, once I organized this event, and Lígia Fagundes Teles went to make a presentation. It was beautiful. And she said she was cleaning her grandmother's house, and she found this notebook. And in this notebook, there were maybe recipes to make goiabada, for instance, to make sweets. And then there was, you know, her bills. And then in another page, there was a poem. So she talked a lot about this non-freedom of women being considered authors. They did everything hidden, underground, and identified this. And she called this woman goiabada. Goiabada is a sweet. So if you could read Zero de Estilo, page 59, that deals with this, from Alma Corsária. And I don't even know where my book is. It's by Claudia Roquette-Pinto. Oh, yeah, I know who that is. Zero de Estilo. To write from the place of despair, you can't wait to be lucid. Zero style. Not even one single poem, and the whole idea that everything is worthwhile, well, that is gone. To write from within this body, the sick body, tired body, from its own sickness and sadness, of the paths that words bring to us, of my own old shirt, blue shirt, shrunk, and it doesn't fit anymore. We can't stretch it anymore. I used to be a poet, I was told. How silly. Now, this is a poem that denies what it says. Alice, have you ever considered being anything but a poet? No, not really. Everything I do comes from the word. Even in HQ, in music. I did some essays, maybe. But I have always had this concern with language. Even in prose, this is something that has to do with poetry. I'm not sure. If you could read in Paixão, Chama Paixão, it's 2-in-1, page 122 of 2 em 1. If I wasn't a poet.
122 do 2 em
1. You really chose this. No, it was by chance. The generation issue matters, you know. Well, it was said that women would only talk about love, that they didn't have anything else to talk about. So I wanted my first book not to talk about love. So the poems about love, of course, we never give up. We always write about love, too. It's one of the matters of life, one of the subjects of life. But I didn't publish at first, and I called Navalha na Liga. It was to pay tribute to the only woman that had a weapon to protect herself. And I decided to leave it for my second book, which was Paixão, and the name says it all. You already give a spoiler here. Basically, these are the poems that I did not include in Navalha na Liga, but I had this courage to do this. Call it paixão, passion, to publish my love poems, because my daughter was born, and I was, completely in love. Nothing like a new life for you to say, now I'm going to see life in a different, from a different perspective. I hope I was not indelicate with you when you were talking about emotions. No, not at all, because because it was the hell of my life. No one would take women seriously. What we're doing here today, no one took us seriously. And when we were talking about any other matter, we said, "What are you talking about this? Why are you mingling in this?" We had to adopt pseudonyms, pen names for the literary market. They had to adopt, pen names. You're maybe using their initials like J.K. Rowling, for instance. Even more recent, I guess this is the most recent and famous. After the millions of books, now she can say who she is. And this is a love letter, a love poem. So in the second edition, you said, well, okay, now I am acknowledged as a poem. Now I can write about emotions and love. Now I can do it. But still, this matter, we talk about this. If I weren't a poet, I would say what your presence means, what is your absence, what is my life filled with presences and absences. If I weren't a poet, you would know when you look at me and hold me, everything that I silence because I'm not as simple as a cat in heat. If I weren't a poet, I wouldn't have this weird sensitivity that makes me see everything clear, makes me love what is rare and everything that is impossible. If I weren't a poet, I might undo so many things I could do away. I could become mad at least once. If I weren't a poet, everything would be just one desire. Dead, so young, during the first kiss, still a child, still so little, still unafraid. If I weren't a poet, you would come in me to be loose somewhere in my memory. But instead of that, I say nothing, and then you are stuck within my verse. You see, life is so cruel. I can't remember who I wrote this for. That's the best thing, right? Amazing. This is more or less like that picture that, from Simone de Beauvoir, naked in a bathroom, putting makeup with, and people believe that the picture was taken by her husband, and it wasn't. And this is what's really cool, because she didn't have a husband, actually. Yes, it was an internationally recognized relationship, but it was a bathroom. They were revolutionaries. They were intellectuals above all, because it would be difficult to desire that man, right? Don't you think so? Oh my God, he was ugly. It seems that he was good to talk to. Oh no. So it was interesting that we saw, Claudia talked about, how it was liberating for her when she divorced and she was able to express herself better. But I want to understand better this relation with the writing within her. Nelson Rodrigues had this joke that he would have with Dias Gomes, who was married to Janete Claire. And Nelson would tell Dias Gomes, you're not even the best writer in your own home, which is something wonderful. And of course, it was a joke. Of Dias Gomes and Janete Claire loved themselves as writers.
But we have here two poets who were married to, or they had a Sartrean Beauvoirian relationship with a poet man. So you with Leminski and Claudia with Leonardo Gandolfo, two great poets. And so what was this poetry exchange about? And I would like also to hear Alice on this topic. Were you his first reader? Was he your first reader? So that's a difficult question. Yes, I can say that we are immersed in this world. We met through poetry, and for 10 years we had a very small publishing house a homemade one dedicated to publishing poetry. So the environment in which we lived was very much dedicated to this topic, and I think we we have this lens of poem and poetry for life. And he is always my first reader. He reads everything, and vice versa. I also read what he writes. And we have a 7-year-old daughter, Rosa, who was always there with us, always living immersed also in poetry. And recently one day she said, this year, I think I no longer want to go to a book launch because she's so much inside it, and we are respecting her wish and we stopped taking her with us. But I think that's it. We live uh, with this lens of poetry to look at life and everything. And how did it work at your place, Alice? Was there any exchange? Yes, all the time. Our main topic was poetry, language, culture. But but what moves life? What moves poetry? So those uh, deeper questions other than who's going to pay for something. And of course, we were also the first readers of one another. And my family knows that I am like that. I'm very strict with those that I love. So I did not make it easy for Paulo when he showed me a more or less poem. I would tell him, we didn't need you to do this. And he already knew. And he accepted my opinion. And actually, I realized he did not give his opinion. Well, no, he wasn't crazy. Do you think I'm very reactive? Well, I wouldn't take the risk. Do you remember anyone, any poet that you introduced to him or that he introduced to you that ended up making part of your repertoire? Yes, I introduced him to some musicians, Caetano, Gil. I already knew them when I lived in Rio before getting to know Paulo. And Paulo, when I met Paulo, he liked rock and classical music. I introduced MPB, Brazilian popular music, to him, and those that were making it at the time, I brought them to our life, into our life. And the literature authors, he introduced them to me. I already knew Joyce, but he introduced like Mayakovsky and others. I'm not really sure. Maybe I already knew something about Mayakovsky. Joyce, I already knew, but the concretes, for instance, including in person. Both Claudia's and Marilia's poetry, they refer to other arts. In the case of Claudia, uh, painting. There are many poets about Chagall, Paul Klee, and others. And Marília also focusing on the movies from the title of your essay. That comes from a long poem by Godard, Thinking with the Hands, and also other references like Ackerman and Agnès Varda to speak of film, and also Alice in music. Music is very central to your work and to the life of everyone because the music has this ability also to reach very far. And it's curious because maybe one of the first things that Itamar Assunção, who was your main partner, yes, I would say your main partner, you wrote Duas Namoradas, two girlfriends. You said, I have two girlfriends, music and poetry, that fill my nights and occupy my days. If I had a choice, I don't know which one I would choose. So what came first, music or poetry? I think music. Music because my father played many instruments especially in dancings, and he would take his band to practice at home. And he played every kind of horns, and but music like that, I would say, without lyrics or anything. But I remember that very soon. I wanted to become a singer. I'm a frustrated singer. Yes, you recorded one record. Yes, but there was Rogeria Holtz that recorded many of my lyrics, and another one with Alzira Guinness, in which I try some backing vocals, and we have a material for another one. Actually, it was published by Zelia's company. Yes, in a partnership with Zelia Duncan. Yes. But you said a friend, but she's a partner, a sister, and etc. I would like you to read one of the published poems, Milagrimas, on page 18. It was recorded by Itamar and Zelia Duncan, that may be here. She's here. Milagrimas. Can I tell you a little bit about this poem before? I had very much like a commitment not to talk about suffering, because I thought there was already enough suffering in life for everyone. Even the luckiest, they always suffer from something like a toothache or something like that. So I thought, I am not going to talk about it, but if I talk about it, I'm going to try to give a solution to it or a way out. And then it came to me, this wordplay, milagrimas, which is a wordplay with a miracle and tears in Portuguese. And then I was able to speak about pain. And being here today is very much like a therapy, because it makes me think of my relationship with part of my poetry and how I used it to manage pain mainly. So milagrimas, this miracle tears, is almost a recipe not to feel pain or not to feel too much pain, or knowing what to do. In case of pain, apply ice. Change your haircut, change like a model. Go to the movies and give a smile, even if it's yellow. Forget your elbow. If it is bad to having been, change your dress, change your patterns. Come out of serious and leave aside criteria and follow every sense and try to make sense. At every tear there is a miracle. In case of sadness, turn the table. Eat only dessert. Eat only the cherry. Throw upwards and make a scene and sing some rhymes in a poem, and suffer only, leave only. But going to the end of the poems, feel the taste of salt, salt. Feel the taste of salt, drop by drop, one by one, 2, 3, 10, 100, 1,000 tears. Feel the miracle. At every 1,000 tears, there is a miracle. At every milagrima, 1,000 tears. So that was a very free translation of the poem, trying to adapt as much as possible. Do you think that your relationship with suffering, trying to end in a positive note, has to do with some relation to the Zen philosophy? Claudia said that she's related to Buddhism, and you also have something about with Zen. And there is a poem that says pain is inevitable and suffering is a choice. Well, I don't know. Maybe there is something about it. What led me to Zen was haikai poetry, because haikai is a Zen practice, and haikai is something very crazy in my life, because when I was a teenager, without having heard of haikai before, when I needed some quiet, I would go to a rivulet that ran behind my house. I was living very far from downtown, and that's where where I went to recover. And so this relationship with nature started back there, and it was there at my adolescence that I started to develop thoughts about nature, or at least record what nature was teaching me in very few words, not in this 3-verse format, but in very few words. And when Paulo introduced haikais to me, I was like, oh my God, I do haikais. I only learned how to better distribute what was the right format, the right number of syllables needed, but Hainmik, which is some undefined thing, a flavor of haikai, already existed, this Haimi. But I don't know, there are no Japanese people in my family, and Paulo thought it was my aunt Tioni because there are poems by Tioni that are similar to mine, and I never heard of this person. I had never heard until I started to read her, and I fell in love with her writing, and I translated a lot of what she wrote. And because of haikai, I went to Zen Buddhism, and even more when I started teaching, which is the best way to learn. So I'm going to ask you to read one haikai. I know it is difficult to read a haikai in public because it requires silence around. It's a very short, small thing. So yeah, you don't even need to read. Well, yes, if you know the haikai. Yeah, but I love telling stories. The story about a haikai. I know that you love it, which is the one that starts with a trimmed grass. Well, you just said a third of the haikai. Yeah, but it wasn't a spoiler. Oh, there are still 2 verses. Well, it's just that our home, and Aria may remember, it was on a slope, and in the front yard there was grass like a garden, but it grows, and we did not have money to pay someone to cut the grass, and so I took the trimmer from the neighbor. I borrowed it, and and Paulo, my husband, said that he had short fingers and he did not have abilities for practical life. So I couldn't stand this growing grass, and so I took the neighbor's machine, and I was trying there to trim my grass, and I spent the entire afternoon trimming it. And then in the end, I gave the machine back to the neighbor, and then I collected the cut grass. And then when I went back home, and there was a deck in front of my house, and then when I turned around and I saw that trimmed garden in front of me, the haikai came to me. Trimmed grass, rough palm, soft soul. All of this. Well, they were blinking the times up 10 minutes ago. Now it's like time's over. Thank you very much. But just to conclude, I would like to ask Alisa to read a last very well-known poem by her, which is Socorro, that has been recorded by Cassia Eller and Arnaldo Antunes also, who likes very much, and who did the composed the music, and if you want to read, it's on page 30. Maybe you know it by heart. Okay. Help, I'm feeling nothing, no fear, no heat, no fire. I won't be able to cry or to smile. Help, any soul, even a lost soul, lend me your feathers. I don't feel love, I don't feel pain, I feel nothing. Help, someone give me a heart because this one is not beating, not being beat. Please, a small emotion, anything you can feel. There are so many feelings, there may be one that fits. Help, some street that gives me sense, direction in any crossing, in any sidewalk or crossway. Help, I don't feel anything. Thank you very much, Alicia Ruiz, Claudia Roquette-Pinto, Marília, Garcia. If this wasn't a roundtable on emotion, I don't know what it was.